Welcome to the Cornerstone Church podcast, conversations and stories of inspiring faith. On today's episode, our host, Pastor Mark Devaney, sits down with Devin and Jessica Grome. Devin and Jessica are our mission partners at European Initiative. We hope that as you hear their story, you are encouraged and inspired to pursue the story God is writing in your life. Let's listen in.
Hey, Devin and Jessica, it is so good to have you here on the podcast, and I know that your faith and story is going to inspire many people. So I'd like to just jump right in and give you the chance to tell us about you guys. Just a little bit about you, how long you've been married, any of that kind of stuff that you want people to know just up front. So kind of your way to introduce yourselves.
So we have been married for almost 9 years now. So January will be 9 years. I am originally from Indiana, born and raised, very small town. And that's where I met Devin in high school in Indiana. So we're high school sweethearts and then got married afterwards. And
you got married right after high school?
Pretty much, yeah, about 6 months after high school.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
Very young. I was 19, he was 18. So we have been, living this life together for a very long time now.
Oh, that's cool. So what'd you do after high school then? You got married, you go into school, college, or what did you do?
Yeah, so we went to a Bible college.
Okay.
Right out of high school, actually. And then about halfway through, we got married. So during Christmas time.
During Christmas break.
Yep, during Christmas break. That was it.
That's wild.
It's a wild story and a long story, but it was cool. And God is just faithful. And definitely confirmed a lot of things in our heart during that time. And best
that's
decision
cool.
of my life.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you went to Bible school, and why did you choose Bible school?
That's a good question. I'll let Devin answer that one.
So when I was 18 years old, I had an experience with God, and I was 17 or 18. I had this experience with the Lord, and He kind of gave me this vision, and I wasn't entirely sure what it meant, and I was just praying afterwards, and for the next few months after that of what it meant, and just asking the Lord to kind of reveal that to me, and He began to walk me through it, and I really felt like God was calling me into ministry. And use this vision. It's I don't want to get into all the details of it. We'll be here the rest of the night, and basically, like I felt like God was calling us into ministry. And so when I started looking at universities, I was looking at Christian universities that had different programs, because I was set on playing sports in college, and I visited a couple different universities, and finally my mom mentioned a Bible school. And at this point, these universities really didn't have the pool that I thought I was going to have when I got there. And I went and visited this Bible college. And as soon as I got there, it was like I could just feel the presence of God. And I was like, this is where we need to be. And I knew that giving up that dream of playing college sports was totally worth it. And it really was. It's where the calling to be missionaries came from during our time there. And so that's how we ended up there, going for, we did 1 year right out of high school. And then we did 2.5 years. We were back in Indiana. I was working as an electrician. And then we went back and did 2 more years of school before we went on the mission field. So it was, that's kind of the
Jessica,
process.
Did you also have this sense of calling for missions, or let's be honest, were you just following him to Bible school?
No, so I actually wanted to be a missionary since I was a kid.
Cool.
Like, I think my mom told me at 9 I started talking about becoming a missionary. But I didn't really think it was going to happen. I didn't see the practical way that could happen, so I kind of wasn't following that dream. So I was actually touring colleges with him to be like a veterinarian or something like that, or a zoologist, because I wanted to work with animals. But I was just like, I really don't like school, don't like doing school, and that's a lot of school to commit to. So I was kind of wavering already. And then when we went to visit the Bible college we went to, I was just there, and I was just like, this is where we're supposed to be. Mm-hmm. Just something in me was like, this is where we're supposed to be. And so, yeah, I just was like, okay, let's do this. I have no idea why I'm going to Bible school, because I still didn't have the thought of being a missionary yet. And I was just like, but I feel like this is where God's calling us to. So
cool. So you go back to school, you finish, and then you're trying to get to this place of determining what's next, right? Yeah. So you're feeling called to missions. So what does that look like as you're trying to discern that? Yeah. What are you?
So sort of. I actually told her before we got married that I never wanted to live out of the States. Okay. And I never wanted to live in a big city. I grew up in small town Indiana, and I was happy with that. And so I knew I was being called into ministry, and I knew I wanted to minister specifically to young people, but I didn't really know what it looked like. I knew it wasn't like just like a youth pastor. I felt like there was something different, but I didn't really know what that looked like. And so during our second year of school, it's mandatory to go on a part of the curriculum to go on a missions trip. And so we sign up for these trips, and we're talking about, what trips we want to go on. And I'm like, man, I really want to go to, I feel like I should go to Hungary, like the Hungary trip. And Jess is like, I'm really actually feeling like I should go to Sri Lanka. And I'm thinking, okay, like, it's not very common that married couples don't go on the same trip during school. You're allowed, but, and we just prayed about it, and like, we kind of felt like we should go on different trips, which, we're like, okay, I said, I'm okay with it if you are. She's like, yeah, I think so. And I think it was really good. She grew in ways that I think me being there may have hindered. I'm much more expressive and talkative than she is, and so sometimes she'll just kind of fall into the background of that. And I think during that time she really stepped out and found out, like, hey, I can minister. Like, this isn't Devin's thing, and I'm just tagging along. Like, I'm called to this as well. And then on my trip to Hungary, it was so life-changing, and during that I felt like it was on the last day of our trip. There's a castle in Budapest that we had a free day, and we were just walking down this castle, kind of looking at the city. And I was having this conversation with the Lord, and he said, Devin, he said, are you willing to give up everything for me? And I said, yeah, I've already told you that. And he said, no, but are you really willing? And I remembered the conversation that I had with her, saying that I would never move out of the country, and I would never live in another, like in a big city. And in that moment, I realized that was the line that I drew in the sand and said, God, I'm not going to cross this. I'll follow you until this point.
Up to this point.
Yeah. It's like, this is where I say no. And in that moment, I just said, God, if you want me to move here, I will. And if you want me to move to a mud hut in Uganda, I just tried to think of like the opposite of Budapest, this beautiful city. And I said, I'll do it. And I texted her, and I just said, man, this week has been like so powerful. And I said, I could actually see doing something like this. And she's getting these texts, and this dream of that a 9-year-old girl had of being a missionary is starting to look like a possibility. Because, I'm essentially just changing what I told her before we got married, that I would never do this, to like, not only would I do this, I actually could see us doing something like this. And, and so from that, we ended up doing an internship the next summer for 3 months with the ministry that I partnered with in Hungary.
Oh, that's neat. That's neat. So what's that like for you though? You went on did you go on your trip first, or did you go on your trip?
I went on my trip first.
You went on your trip first. So you're hearing him say that, then you go on your trip. So like, what starts running through your mind, Jessica, as you are hearing that, but then you're going to experience some stuff?
Yeah. So I really started thinking that missions was really going to be a part of our life. I didn't think at all that I would actually be a missionary living in another country than the one I was born in. But I thought, man, he's like really getting touched by the Lord, and he's really seeing how missions can be amazing. And like, so I was like, man, that means like we'll start going hopefully like often, and we'll, go on all kinds of trips and stuff. And then I went on my trip and just really realized like how important my story is. And God was like, Jessica, I can use you. Like, you may think that you are small and you don't have things to say, but I have something powerful inside you that I need you to share. And so I shared those things, and like, he just moved through me on that trip in so many different ways. And I gained this godly confidence in him, and showed me that I really do have something impactful and important to impart to people. And so it was really powerful for me. And I was like, this is it. I could do this all the time. Like, this is just where I gel. This is what I was made for. And then when he came back from his trip, the founder of the ministry that we were with asked us to do an internship. And so before I even went to Sri Lanka on my trip, we had already scheduled a summer internship that we were going to do that summer. And so I flew back from my trip in Sri Lanka, and then I think 3 weeks later we graduated from second year, and then like a week later we were on a plane going to Berlin, Germany, and we spent 2.5 months in Europe, just traveling all over Europe and in Berlin, and we ended up going to Budapest twice that summer. And so I got to experience Budapest. And I just, as soon as we landed, I was just like, wow, this place is absolutely amazing. And we did trips there and were able to minister there, and just really fell in love with the culture and the people, and just being there started to just really feel like this is something I could do every day. Yeah. Like, this could be my everyday life. And I started to ask Devin those questions like, hey, like, what do you think? Like, could you see this being our life? And to my surprise, he was like, yeah, I could. And so it was amazing. It was just like this step-by-step journey God was taking each of us on, just affirming that this is what we were supposed to be doing. And at that end of that trip, the founders like took us to dinner and then asked us like, could you see yourself doing this? Could you see yourself being a part of what we're doing here? And we were like, yeah, we can. And
so then what's your steps after that? So they take you to dinner. You're like, yeah, absolutely. Like, we've thoroughly, not just enjoyed this, but like, we're seeing something that we believe God's putting together. So like, what's next steps after that?
Yeah. So for us, it was, so we met and they said, well, what are the next, 5 years look like for you? What's your plan after school? That kind of stuff. And I said, I'm doing third year next year. And after that, like, we actually kind of had the thought about what it would look like to come here, and they kind of laughed and they said, well, we were going to ask you like what you thought about that, and if missions is something in your heart. And we said, yeah. And, we talked a bit longer, and I said, one thing for me is like, when I was making a decision, like I can be quick and emotional about decisions. It's like, this feels good, let's do it, And I didn't want that, because I'm like, you hear from missionaries and it's tough, like full-time ministry, it's tough. It's fulfilling. Right. It's absolutely amazing. But it's hard. And I never wanted, if I went into full-time ministry, I never wanted there to be the question of, God, did I miss it? I'm okay with the question of why did I say yes, as long as I know that I'm called to this, right? I said yes because I'm called to this. Because when things get hard, I want to make sure, like, my fallback, oh man, did I miss it? Was I not supposed to be here? I wanted to know that, hey, this is where we're supposed to be. And I told him, I said, can we just let us get back to the States, let us get back into like normal life, and just really pray about this and see. And we got back to the States, and I had the worst culture shock that I've ever had in my life, going back to the place that I've lived for, my whole life. And I honestly felt like I hated it. And felt like I was depressed for like a week. And, I'm just kind of feeding into that, feeling like, ugh, I don't want to be back. I'm ready to go back to Europe. And Jessica's like, well, Devin, what is going on with you? And I said, honestly, I don't like being back. I really don't like it. And she said, well, you can't be like this. Like, God's called us here. You're doing third year at school, and we're where God wants you to be. So you can't be like this. And it was what I needed to get me out of that funk. And what was happening is God was taking the desire, because it was so strong in me to just live in the States and be here, taking that desire and literally just taking it completely out. And all I wanted was to go back. And so about a month later, we were at school, and the founder of the ministry, Jeff Serio, was coming to the school to speak. And, he's like, hey, let's grab coffee. And I said, Jeff's going to ask us, what we're wanting to do, and we need to give an answer. And at that point, both of us were really feeling like, hey, this is from the Lord. And so that was kind of our next step. And so we met up with him, and that's when we made that decision, like in October of 2017. Like, yeah, like we really think God's calling, like we know God's calling us to do this.
So do you finish your third year? Did you finish your third year of school?
Not at that point. I was in my third year.
Okay.
Right. And so I was graduating in whatever it was, May. And so when we met with him, obviously that was, hey, and fundraising takes time, it's not, hey, yeah, we'll move, and a week later we're flying to Europe kind of thing. So once we met with him and said, yes, there's still a board meeting, you meet with the board, and then they approve you. Once you're approved, then you start fundraising. And so actually a week after we met with him, they had a board meeting scheduled already. And so we flew down to Dallas from Denver, where we went to school, and had a board meeting, got approved, and started fundraising.
How was fundraising? What was that like? Like that's a tough thing for a lot of people. You gotta go around and ask for money.
That's a tough one. I feel like there'd be a lot more missionaries if that wasn't the case, because it's work, and it's something that's constant, right? It's not something where it's like, I've fundraised how much I need and I'm good forever. People, their financial situations change, and so givers come and go, and things change. So it's a constant thing that happens. But I think it's the way that you look at fundraising. If you're asking for, especially as Americans, maybe it's just me, like it was always, you work, right? And it felt like I wasn't, because I'm fundraising, I'm asking for money, but it is work. Being a missionary is work, and you have to look at it as not, I'm not asking for money for just my well-being. Like, I'm asking for money for the kingdom of God, right? And when we have a perspective, it's easier to ask, right? That, look, I'm asking for the Lord. Hey, do you believe in me enough to sow into the calling that God's put on my life to make a difference in a city, in a nation, in another continent? And when you kind of get that perspective, it helps, because if you're thinking about fundraising as it's for me, then you've missed it. It is for you,
right?
But it's not about you, right? And so ministry is my job, but it's not for me. You know what I mean? And so that's the difference, I think. And when I kind of got that revelation, because it was hard at first, I was like, man, like, I don't know what to do. And like, God, like, I'm sending out letters and emails, and I'm meeting with people for coffee, because that's what you do. And, and you've got this mindset. But then it was like, I was just praying one day, and God said, Devin, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm fundraising. He said, but you're trying to do it without me. Like, you're just, what have I asked you to do? And I said, just talk to people. He said, so stop rushing it. Stop putting all this pressure on yourself to make it happen. I'll do it. And it wasn't until I really let go of it and just said, God, you tell me what to do, that we began to see the finances come in that we needed. So it was definitely a learning curve for us.
How long did it take you to get to the level where you could actually go overseas? How long did it take? So
we were approved in October of 2017 to join staff, and we didn't really start fundraising until probably January, I would say. Finishing up school and things or I was doing school, and just, I don't know, you just don't think, and then it's like January comes and you're like, oh, school's over in 5 months and we still haven't fundraised. And so we started fundraising in January, February, and we ended up moving the first week of December.
Okay.
So 11 months for us, and some people it's quicker and some not. Yeah, but it was definitely the Lord's timing. We my brother just had our niece, and so it gave us time after school to go back home, spend some time with her as an infant and stuff, because I think that's one of the hardest parts about being a missionary, maybe, is family. But it gave us time to spend with family after school. We didn't move from school to there, you know, and really, have that time together before going. So
this would be December 2018.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you've raised enough support to land, and so you landed where? Where did you go? You're in
Budapest, Hungary.
You're in Budapest, Hungary.
Yep.
Your boots on the ground December.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's that like as you first get there, are starting to get settled in this reality of, oh my goodness, we're actually doing this.
Yeah. So actually with European Initiative, we have teams coming all year long. And we actually had a team from our Bible college there on the ground when we landed.
Oh, wow.
So when we landed, we immediately the next day went into ministry with the...
Can't even unpack your stuff in the room, right?
We didn't even unpack anything.
We had an Airbnb, and there wasn't much room to unpack. It was a little, single room Airbnb that we were staying at while we were looking for an apartment.
But what was that? What was that like, though? You land on the ground, so there's got to be some sense of familiarity to the people that are there now and stuff. So, I mean, did that give you kind of this sense of calm even in the midst of it?
Actually, when we landed, it just was like, we landed and it was like, this is where we're supposed to be. It was like this moment. It felt like home. It felt like we were returning to something that was familiar.
Oh, good.
And it just felt like this peace, and this was where the grace was. This was where like our hearts were the whole time. So it was almost like we felt more complete, and it felt more natural. Even though we didn't have an apartment, we didn't have anything. We're staying at staying at a B&B, just looking for places to stay, and but it felt real. It felt like this is where it was supposed to be.
Yeah.
So in the 11 months you're fundraising, did you go back over to Budapest? So you didn't go back over there. So it's not like you had gone over and had done a little exploring on even neighborhoods that you might want to live in, places, nothing like that.
No.
So you were just solely focused on fundraising.
Yep.
So you land in December of that year, no apartment.
Yeah.
Whatever belongings, I assume, were with you at that point.
4 checked bags and 2 dogs,
Yep.
Wow.
in a one-room Airbnb, and so the team's there, and I mean, we had other staff there, so they were like the main leads on the team. And actually, I'm glad the team was there, because it can seem kind of monotonous sometimes when you just sit. You can only look for an apartment so much in one day before you just got to step away from it. And so we would do ministry in the morning and look for apartments in the afternoon, or vice versa. And we ended up finding an apartment in 10 days. God blessed us, living downtown in Budapest, and a neighborhood that we shouldn't be able to afford. But he gave us a great apartment for a great price. And, the Lord just blesses you when you just follow his will for your life. You'll find blessings just around every corner. And we've been there for 4 years, same apartment for 4 years.
I don't even stay in a house that long, so that's pretty impressive. That's a big joke if you ask the people that know me around here. So so you're there on the ground, you're starting to get settled. Obviously a lot of what you're doing is hosting teams from I assume the States mostly that are coming over and serving with European Initiative. But what about beginning to establish like the ministry that you want to have actually in Budapest? Like what are you trying to do and get established as you're getting boots on the ground there? Yeah,
so actually for us it was a lot different too, because we didn't have a base. European Initiative didn't have a base in Budapest at the time. So we were a part of the team to start that and cultivate it. So we had one of our colleagues, he moved in August the same year that we did, so a little bit before us. And then our base leader at the time, she had moved in January, so a little bit before him. So when we landed, it was like we finally had our whole team. So then after the team left, we got our apartment, felt more like we're kind of getting a rhythm of things. We started to cultivate what a base in Budapest looks like. What's our dream for Budapest? What's our heart? What do we want to see happen in Hungary? And what ministries do we want to do here? And so we had those kind of meetings a lot and just started knocking on doors. We have been European Initiative has been going to Budapest for some time. So we do have relationships there already from like all the trips that we've taken. But so we just started cultivating those relationships more and just knocking on doors with other churches, other ministries, and just representing us, who we are, what does EI do, and yeah, doing.
So in that time frame at this point, you've got two major things that have happened in that area, right? One of them was globally. So you have the pandemic that hits, which is literally about 15 months then, if my math's right, about 15, 16 months from when you first landed on the ground. Right? So not much time to build ministry as somebody who's I've been at this church, I've been attending this church for 20 years. And so it takes a while to get ministry going. So pandemic hits. What's it like in Budapest when shutdowns come and like all that stuff is happening?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, we had, basically a year, a little over that, like you said, of teams coming, of developing ministry, what it looked like, of going into schools. We started reaching out to schools to go there as native English speakers. We get the opportunity to go into schools and practice English with students, and public schools there allow us to talk about faith in the classroom, which is amazing. And so, we're developing that and working on that and all these things. And we've got, 2020 coming up, and we've got over 40 teams coming throughout the year, and we've got ministry going on in Budapest, and we're kind of rocking and rolling, actually, because again, like, we'd been going to Budapest, so it wasn't like we were totally starting something from scratch. Like, there was ministry already there that we kind of stepped into, as well as developing new things. And February, I guess it's February when it hit in Europe, and a little later maybe March in the US, but we hear about this virus, and nobody's thinking anything of anything, and we've got teams I think we had a team in Romania.
We had a team in Ukraine.
In Ukraine, yeah. And so the team flies out. It was a team from England, actually, and the next day, all the flights got canceled. And we're like, what on earth? Because it's starting to get more serious, and we're kind of hearing more about this virus and all these different things, and nobody really knows what's going on, trying to figure it out, and I'm just thinking, it's just another virus, it happens, things go around, and next thing you know, all of Europe shuts down, and then we find out like things aren't opening. And so we go from 43 teams to like none, except for the teams that have already come, pretty much overnight. I mean, there's some teams that were holding out, but we had to start canceling trips because they're shutting down Europe. Like, full lockdowns are happening, and flights are just grounded. They're just, everything's canceled. So our next month looked like a lot of admin trying to get back deposits on housing, on flights, on whatever, changing this, changing that, adjusting this, and
asking for vouchers or money back, or
and a lot of meeting and praying together about what is ministry going to look like, because schools got canceled, so schools closed immediately, and actually they allowed us to continue doing things on Zoom, which was cool. A lot harder than face-to-face with students, but at least we could continue that ministry and those relationships. But and we do a lot of street ministry and evangelism on the streets and stuff, but people were kind of nervous to talk, and so that first month was kind of like, what's going on, what do we do? And we finally we don't have teams coming. We're just going to do ministry. We're missionaries. Like, we're just going to continue doing what we're doing. We're going to do more ministry than we were before, because now we don't have to coordinate teams. So we have more time in the day to do outreaches and stuff. And what we thought was going to be this daunting thing ended up being a huge blessing. I'm not saying COVID was a blessing, but we just were able to really focus on ministry, and ministry exploded during COVID. And the cool thing was, the first couple of months doing street ministry of COVID was, people were a little hesitant to talk because they didn't really know, nobody really knew what was going on. And so people were kind of nervous. But honestly, after about 3 or 4 months in Hungary, people were just tired of it. it doesn't take long of not being able to have relationships with, anyone to be tired of what's going on. And so they were, can't go to school, working from home, all this stuff. And so when we started conversations, people were more than willing to talk. They loved talking because they didn't get to talk to people very often. And we had such amazing conversations with people on the street in Budapest, just talking about the gospel and the love of Christ to these people who just their whole view of Christianity as religion and just works, just doing enough good things to be good enough for God. And so most of them have become atheists because of it. I don't believe in God because, whatever. Just powerful conversations. And so it was really amazing what God did in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah. So the government shut things down for a season. Doesn't seem like it was too long if you're back able to get out and do things 4 to 6 months later. And I know you guys did some stuff. You did a tour around Europe with a group of folks at one point with that.
Yeah. So actually, we didn't have any teams, and so Jeff Serio was like, let's start thinking about what we can do as a staff. Like, even if we can't have teams here, we can do stuff. We can do stuff in our own countries, and we can do stuff in countries that'll allow us to travel there. And so that's what we did. And he started praying, and he just felt like God gave him this vision of Acts 13, just going out and just having a group of people and just every day, city to city, country to country, evangelizing, sharing the gospel. And all of us were like, wow, that's a really huge
we're
dream.
All super hyped.
We're like, that sounds amazing. But we're like, there's COVID. We can't travel.
We're in the middle of a pandemic here. Like, we don't even know where we can go, what we can do. I mean, let's do it. But like, what does that even look like? Yeah.
And so we were like, okay, Jeff, if this is what God has given you, we're for it. Yeah. We'll try it. And we started reaching out to people like, hey, we're doing a summer trip, 40 days. And we got 40 people to come to Europe
in the middle of
the pandemic. And we had 40 people come, and there was 4 groups. And the Europeans traveled the EU for 40 days. And then we had 2 groups of Americans come, and one went to...
There were 2 countries open, Belarus and Serbia.
One to Serbia and one to Belarus. Those were the only 2 countries open to Americans during the time. So
they went there.
They went there.
We split them up, and one group went to Belarus, one went to Serbia, and we spent 30 days in Belarus because of visa stuff. You can't be there longer than that. And 40 days in Serbia. And
traveled all over.
It's awesome.
Had so much amazing ministry. Like, it was amazing. It was powerful in the middle of a pandemic, and
I think there was something like over 200 salvations that year.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Just that summer, and within 40 days between the 40 people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's when you look back on it, of course, we all get frustrated, and if you pay attention, especially in the U.S., we become very critical of what was happening during the pandemic and stuff like that. We're 2.5 years in some ways looking back on that, but you see how God worked in so many ways, even in the midst of that. We're seeing a shift in church life today. Here, and a lot of it centers around our families. Like there was this resurgence of people going, oh, wait a minute, this was nice to be around the table with my family, to not be so busy with all of the sports and the different events that we have going on. Like it was different, like a different season for them. And a lot of people, even today, they're holding on to that. They're saying, no, we want to prioritize, family from that perspective. So it's really neat to look back and see, look what God did during that season where a lot of us felt like, man, I can't believe this is happening. And, we're grumbling and we're complaining about stuff and being stuck at home. And, but man, you're going, but God did some awesome stuff in the middle of that.
It was hard. I mean, personally, in 2020, we traveled, and I traveled on probably 6 or 7 different trips, going different places, and I'd had to quarantine for 10 days every time I came back. So I spent like 2 months in quarantine over the span of 2020, and that's hard. I mean, it's hard. But when you change the focus, like the first time I did it, I was like, oh, this is terrible. And then you just realize, you know what, I'm doing this for the Lord. Like at this time, even being stuck in my apartment, like can be good. Right. Yes. And you really have to refocus in the middle of those times, because God didn't cause COVID, but he'll use it. Like he turns all evil for good to those who love him. Right. And so if we love God and we prioritize him, like even in the midst of a global pandemic, we can see ministries grow. We can see the gospel go out. We can see people's lives changed. And we can see our own lives changed if we focus on him. And if we start to realize, you know, like you said, we can sit down and have dinner tonight. Why? Because we can't go anywhere. Right? Like we can prioritize those relationships. We can pour into our marriages. We can pour into our families. And believe it or not, we can pour into friendships. It might look different, but it's possible, you know? And so again, it's our perspective of things. And when we keep our eyes focused on God in the middle of the storm, all of a sudden the storm doesn't seem so big.
Yeah, that's good. It's good to hear. Take me now to, you've mentioned this a little bit about culture shock. You mentioned coming back from Budapest, going back to school. I assume you were going back to school at that time and not back to home.
For a week in Indiana, but then straight to school. Yeah.
So you're talking about culture shock.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about like the cultural difference between Budapest and the U.S. Knowing the U.S. is kind of broad. I mean, you're from small town Indiana, you know, going to college in Denver, I think you said.
Yeah.
So like, I know there's some differences with that, but like, what are some of the big distinctions between the U.S. and Budapest?
I mean, they're kind of ridiculous for us, to be honest. The biggest thing that so I didn't have a lot of culture shock going to Europe, which was kind of strange. I thought I would. This is so ridiculous. Paying for toilets.
Okay.
So yes. I know this sounds, it's hilarious, right? It sounds ridiculous. Tell me more about this. But it's when we got there, like there's no like free public toilets. And if you go to a restaurant, unless you eat there, like you're not allowed to use the toilet unless you pay. And so like, as an American, this is hard for me. I'm like, I have to pay 50 cents to go to the restroom. Like, this is what, you know, like it's ridiculous things like that. And it was like, it actually took me like a year probably to like get to the point where I didn't feel like almost angry every time I had to pay for the toilet of all the dumb things. Right. And then water, like a lot of restaurants don't do free water. Like you have to buy bottles of water. They don't do like the free tap water kind of thing. Some places do, but
usually nicer restaurants, you can ask for table water.
Yeah, table water or whatever, and they'll bring out like a pitcher or whatever. But like that was hard. I don't know why. You know.
The other
praise God, that was the worst thing that I had to
like
suffer
if that's
through.
God, I don't feel that bad right now.
You shouldn't feel that bad.
You shouldn't.
But what's funny is most Americans that come are like shocked by this.
Yeah.
Like it's not just a me thing. Like even now, like Americans come and they're like, "What? You have to pay for what?" Like it's like this. Like I don't know. Like.
And we were doing outreach in the middle of a square, and one of the team leads that was with us of a church, he was like, "Man, I can't wait to go to dinner and just get a tall glass of ice water and just drink it and get a refill."
They don't do ice either.
I just started laughing.
I get it.
And I was like, "I'm so sorry to break your heart, but you have to buy a water, and it's only in a bottle, and you will not get ice at all."
Yeah.
Like ice it's not really a thing. And he was so disappointed.
It's those little things. Like moving to Europe, right? And so it's different than maybe moving to, there are places in Europe, like, you know, places that we go that are incredibly poor, third world, just 20, 30 minutes outside of a major city in Europe. But the main, like Europe, as a whole, like you're not dealing with extreme poverty. Exactly. Yeah. You're not moving to a place that's extreme poverty. So it's all these weird things, like cultural things, food. It's one of the they say, and from my experience, it's been true that like food, your taste buds are the last thing that change when you move to a different culture. And I definitely had that. You would be walking down the street and you'd smell something. And you're like, oh, I want this place from, you know, we're from Indiana, but we're near Cincinnati. So Cincinnati chili, it's a big thing, Skyline chili. And I would just get random cravings for that, and you're like, oh, I really want this. Just weird things like that. Like, it wasn't like we had this huge cultural shock. I think it was more of like these random little things. You're like, oh, I miss this. Or like, oh, I want this.
Or having to go to the grocery store almost every day.
Yeah, you go more often.
You walk to the grocery store every day because you get your dinner for that day, or maybe a few days, and you get your fresh produce and
going to the bakery.
Fresh bread.
You don't buy bread for the week. You buy bread for the day or two. Just weird things like that. That was it was. So that's when you're going to Europe. That's kind of the culture shock you're dealing with more than like some crazy thing. It's all these little things that just kind of pop up.
So and then what's it like ministering to people there? Like, are they resistant towards the gospel? They're indifferent towards it. They hate it. Like, what's that like?
It depends on where you are in Europe.
Okay.
For us in Hungary, we can usually have a conversation with people. They're very open to just talk and have a conversation. And we can talk about faith, and they'll talk about it. They have been raised around faith or known the idea of it in the country of Hungary. Like, the Catholic belief is very prominent. It's very strong. It's where its roots are. And so they've heard of it and had the idea of it. But the younger generation has stepped away from it because it's become more of a works and traditions and a striving for perfection mentality, and they don't like that. They feel like they're judged and mistreated, and so they've stepped away from it. So when you present the gospel and the truth of who Jesus is and what he really did, they're genuinely open to it, and they're like, I've never thought of it this way. So, yeah.
I think they're Europeans. Europe is one of the least evangelized continents in the world, and it's like something less than 2% born again Christians as a whole. Places like France actually just got to 1%. Which for the last 40 years has been like 0.5%. So actually that's like a huge breakthrough. You think about it, that it's growing there. And so it's very secular, very secular. I think actually COVID has opened people up more to hearing the gospel because everything they put their faith in was just ripped out from under them. Their jobs, their identity is their job. Their health care. A lot of places in Europe, they pride themselves in their health care. Their, relationships, family, things like that were just all taken away because you can't see family, can't do this because you can't whatever. People are worried about visiting their grandparents because they're, what if I get them sick and then they die or something. And, we met a guy doing an outreach one day, just passing out these little, we called them COVID care packages. And it was like a little meal and, just Bible, some tracts, things like that. And it was just, we would go into lower income areas and go to the homes and pass them out. We talked to this one older man, and he said, I haven't seen my family in 8 months. They won't come see me because they're worried I'm going to get sick. And he said, I'd rather get sick and die than have to go through this. And we talked to him for an hour, and at the end of it, he was just in tears. And we were just sharing the love of Christ with him and just being relational with him. And he was just in tears that he got impacted in that way, and was able to, have a conversation. And so people are open, but at the same time, Europe is very hard, especially Western Europe. They're very tolerant, sort of, in the sense that like, hey, that's good for you, but don't talk to me about it.
Gotcha, yeah.
And so it can be very difficult. I mean, I've been spit on in Prague before for sharing the gospel. We've had, alcohol bottles thrown at us on the streets of Prague. It's always Prague for whatever reason. I think Czech Republic is one of the spiritually darkest places in Europe, statistically. And so maybe that's it. But, it's like, so you get things like that. Most of the time it's not that extreme. Honestly, that's the very extreme. Most of the time it's just like, hey, like I don't want to hear it.
So you find people are either open to the conversation or polite enough to decline in some way.
Yeah. You're not usually getting spit on. It's typically like, hey, that's good for you. Like, it's just not for me. Or we've had some people like, I don't want to talk about this, and they're really firm, and you respect that. We're not. You got to realize, like, in evangelism, like, it's not your job to get the person saved.
Right.
Like, it's our job to be the messenger and allow the Holy Spirit to convict their heart. And so if we're going into a conversation to convert them, we've missed it already. Right. And so that's the cool thing, is it takes the pressure off when it's like, there's nothing you have to do except share. And if they don't want anything to do with it, you can't force them.
Nope.
And so, but there are a lot of people that I think are open and really looking. They may challenge you, but I've noticed that, especially in recent years, people have been more open, even in a challenging conversation. They may ask some hard questions, but they're like looking for the answer.
Yeah.
Like they really want those answers, like the answer to the question. It's not just them antagonizing you,
What's the language barrier like for you guys?
In Hungary, in Budapest specifically, a lot of people speak English. A lot of the younger generation speaks English, which makes learning the language quite difficult, because when you try to speak in Hungarian, they'll automatically switch to English. But when you get outside of Budapest is when it becomes more difficult. Typically, they do not speak English. They only speak Hungarian.
So have you gotten to where you speak Hungarian pretty well, or?
No,
I wouldn't say
unfortunately.
pretty well. Hungarian is considered to be the third hardest language in the world for English speakers.
Okay. And why not choose there to be a missionary?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, why not?
I mean, if I'm going to learn a second language,
the first hardest place.
Yeah, exactly. So we're not learning, Mandarin or Arabic. We'll just start with Hungarian. It's incredibly difficult, but it's a nice language. I like it, and I can understand more than I can speak, for sure. But part of us, we've been so busy and with ministry and things, and at the end of the day is not the time to learn a language. You're tired from the day, and you're trying to wrap your head around Hungarian, and you're like, oh my gosh, Lord help me. And so I can make excuses. We just haven't made the priority of it as we should have.
You're picking up on it as you go, though.
And we've studied. I mean, I say we haven't. We've studied. We did 3-month intense course when we first moved, and we've done private lessons since, on and off, and it's good. And we have Hungarians that are on staff with us because you just need that, it's important. But so for Hungary, that's kind of the situation. Europe as a whole, I think places like Germany, everybody speaks English. Honestly, their English is better than mine. It's impressive. And the further up into the Nordic countries, and they're, I mean, goodness gracious, their English is unbelievable. And then the further east you go, the English typically is less, typically. But we have awesome partners that we're always looking to partner with the church. So European Initiative is a evangelistic ministry. And so for that to be effective, we need to partner with the church. And for the church to be effective, they need to partner with the evangelistic ministries, because it goes hand in hand, and so we reach out to churches and build great relationships. We've got some awesome partners throughout Europe that we partner with, and they help with translation, and it's a place that we can get people plugged into. So we go and we do trainings for churches as well to teach them how to evangelize to their cities, to their nation, and then in that it helps us to continue doing what we're doing and reach Europe. So
that's neat. Well, I said there were two major things that happened, of course, since you landed on the ground. So the first was the pandemic, and obviously 2022 hits, and you've got a war that breaks out. Pretty close to where you guys are. So tell us a little bit about how that's changed, how the war in Ukraine has changed some of what you guys are doing for ministry, or even brought new opportunities for ministry that weren't there before.
So we, Hungary borders Ukraine. It's about, from Budapest to the border is about a 3.5-hour drive. And we've been doing ministry in Ukraine for years. It's part of Europe. And we've been going there for many years, even before we went on, we were on staff. European Initiative has gone there. And we actually had a team on the ground in Ukraine when the war broke out. back in February. So on the 27th, I wake up. I slept through my alarm. I wake up at like 8 o'clock, and I've got text from my boss that says Russia just invaded Ukraine. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And so I call our staff member who's leading the team, and I'm like, hey, what's going on, man? He's like, we're trying to get out. A lot of the borders are closed right now. We're trying to figure out how to get the team out. And I'm like, okay, cool. He's like, we're going through Slovakia. I'm like, okay, cool. So I call up a pastor friend of ours. I'm like, can I use your van? He's like, yeah, sure. So I get the van. I drive 5 hours to the Slovakian border where I'm picking them up. And this whole hectic situation for them to get out. But we get this team out. We get them back to Budapest. And all is good. The next day, we're trying to figure out, what to do. I mean, I think people are still a little in shock that this happened. And, we get together as a team and we're praying, and I'm kind of angry that we're praying. And I'm thinking, why am I angry that we're praying? There's nothing wrong. Like, prayer's good, right? Hear me out. I'm not against prayer at all, but I felt like, man, all of America's praying. All of Europe's praying. We're close enough to do something. Like, we should do something here, And our previous base leader who had moved to Ukraine came back out with the team. And she's sharing with us a little bit. She was staying at our apartment, and she was just sharing with us about some people that had some stuff and needed to get in. And she's like, do you know anybody who could drive in? And I'm thinking, I mean, I can drive in. That's not hard. And she's like, Jeff and Barb will never let you do that. And I'm thinking, no, they won't. I'm like, this is crazy. I'm going to drive into a war-ridden country with supplies, and so I just kind of let it go. And as the day went on, it was like the conviction got more and more. And I'm to the point, like, we're praying. I stepped away, and I think I called my dad. I just was like, I needed someone to just hear what's going on, and I unloaded all this on him, and he's like, okay. He's like, well, you won't know if you don't call him. And I'm like, yeah, and so I'm like, all right. So I prepare, like, I'm ready, man. I'm ready to, like, explain to them and just really contend to get this project approved, and I call him and I share. I said, hey, this is what's going on, and there's these people that need stuff taken in, and I'm crying. Like, I'm heartbroken, honestly, because it's just crazy what's going on with the governments, and these innocent people that have nothing to do with any of this are being affected. There's people stuck at bomb shelters, that literally can't get out because of senseless governmental decisions, and I'm just sharing with them, and I finish, and I'm getting ready to just pitch it really hard, and I'm like, this is like, and they're just like, let's do it. Like, I don't even have to convince them, I'm thinking, oh, come on,
you prepared this big, long,
oh yeah, I'm like, I've got
speech.
this speech of 4 pages written out of why we should, and Barb goes, she goes, I was just praying and trying to figure out how we can do something, because we're European Initiative. We cannot do something. And they gave me the approval right there. And I was like, what? And so the next day we loaded up vans and on Sunday. So war started Thursday. We went and drove in on Sunday with vans.
Wow.
We didn't have a budget for it. It's not like we had, $1 million sitting in an account somewhere. We're not a big organization.
Yeah.
But we get things done with what we have. And Jeff said, hey, he's like, just whatever it takes to fill 2 vans, go for it. And we'll just see what happens from there. And so I did that, took pictures as I went, and just shared with Jeff what happened. And get back to Budapest Sunday night. It was a day trip, and he goes, somebody gave $20,000. Guess we're going again. And I was like, all right. And that just kept happening. And since then, we've taken in over $800,000 worth of medical supplies, food supplies, just all kinds of things that are needed. And we're still currently driving in. And now in the winter months, people need the electric supply is just not there. People need coats and all kinds of stuff. So we're actually going to be, when we get back, driving into Ukraine to take a lot of coats in for children and people in bomb shelters and things like that.
That's impressive that you're able to do that. It's another one of those things you just see God
it's just
provide in
His
ways
grace.
that you
Yeah.
never thought possible, and here you
Yeah.
are just like, hey, I'm willing. Let's be able to hear my send me, right? Like,
Yeah.
okay, God, I'm gonna go in and do
Yeah.
this thing. I never thought I would, but
That's
I'm willing
exactly
to.
it.
You said yes to Jesus. I mean, that's part of how our conversation started, right?
Yeah.
It was, man, you're gonna say yes to Him, and
That's it.
He wanted to make sure, like, it wasn't yes as long as I don't go overseas or
Yeah.
don't do this thing. And here, He's sending you into, basically a war zone.
Yeah.
And you're able to minister and love people. That's great.
Yeah.
So let me give you this chance just real quick as we just wrap up our time, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, one of the things that I really would love is for people to hear your story and just be inspired. Like,
Yeah.
I'm one of those folks at this point where, I look at life and I think, man, it's like, let's do something. Like,
Yeah.
let's go do something that Jesus is opening the door for us to
Amen.
do. So, like, what's something that you would like to share with folks that might hear this, that might inspire them to go do something in their life, just like you guys. I mean, here you are, you've got to be late 20s kind of thing, and you're married for 9 years, and look what you're doing just by being obedient. So, give you a chance to share whatever you'd like to, just with anybody that's listening at this point.
I think for me, honestly, I had to have this conversation with God, and I was just like, God, before we, became missionaries and before we finished college, I was just having this conversation with God, and I was like, God, I'm living this life and I'm making these decisions, and right now we're working and maybe necessarily living the American dream, and we're thinking about buying a house and starting a family. But I'm like, I feel no purpose in this. I feel no life from this. I hate my life. I don't feel like this is what life is supposed to be like. And if this is what life is supposed to be like, God, I don't want it. Like, I want something more in my life. And I think for all of us, it's having that conversation of just saying, God, like, what do you want for my life? What have you called me to do? What do you have for me? And when He says something, being willing to say yes and surrender with whatever it looks like. And for Devin and I, it was him a really good job. Like, when I asked God that question, He said, why don't you go and finish college? Why don't you finish Bible college? And I was like, we're making money. We have this, we have this, we have this, we have this. We had to say no to a very, in the world, successful life.
Yeah.
And quit all of that and turn our backs on that and say yes to what God had for us and go back to college and finish what we had started there.
Yeah.
And that was the first step. But the next step was going on a mission trip. And the next step was meeting the place we're working for. And then the next step was being called to a missionary and living a life that has completely fulfilled us and given us purpose. And we can't see ourselves not doing this. And I tell people all the time, it's saying yes to God when He asks you to do something, even in the small things, because you don't know where it's going to lead.
Yeah.
When you say yes in the small, then He's going to give you the next step, and it's going to be bigger and bigger and bigger. And God is never going to call you to something that you're not going to like. He knows exactly how you were made. He knows your personality, and He knows your plan and your purpose. And He has a plan for you that is so much greater and more amazing than you could ever imagine or think. And it's so perfectly knitted for exactly who you were made to be. And you're going to find so much joy and purpose and fulfillment in it. And it may be scary, but if you're willing to surrender and trust Him and know that He has a good plan for you, then you're on the right track to finally getting like fulfillment and purpose. And I say just take those small steps when God asks you to do something, because you never know where you're going to land.
That's good. Thank you for sharing that.
That's good.
Devin, what you got?
I think it just goes back to like, here I am, send me. And I think that, as Christians and as Americans, maybe, like, sometimes we just get into this, like, this is what it's supposed to look like. And until we, like, realize that, hey, this isn't for me. Like, the American dream's not for me. there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with having nice things. I don't have any issues with that at all. But for me, it was like, God, I've got these things, and I'm just so unhappy. I've got an amazing wife. I've got a car. We're looking at buying a new car. I'm looking at buying a house, and I'm 20 years old, 21 years old, you know, and I'm miserable. I'm miserable. And I finally just said, God, I've done my own thing, and I did a great job, and I hate it. And in that moment, I said, God, you know, we're Jeremiah 29:11. God has a good plan for you, right? We hear this verse growing up, but we don't trust God enough to actually believe that he has a good plan. And what's funny is, for me, the good plan was the thing that I thought I'd hate. I thought, man, I'll never move out of the country and I'll never live in a city. That would be the worst. And the one thing I thought I would hate the most is the one thing that I love more than anything, because it's God's plan for me. And so I know there's a lot of people listening that have felt like, man, I could never move to another country. I could never, you know, do this. I could never do this. And maybe God's not calling you to do that. And I'm not saying you have to, and the only purpose in life is to be a missionary. I'm not saying that at all. But when you surrender to God and you say, God, I'll do whatever you want me to do, whatever he calls you to do is going to be so fulfilling, even if it's the thing that you thought you'd hate, because God does have a good plan for you, and he wants good for you. He's not out there trying to like make your life miserable to suffer for the gospel. Is there suffering that we've gone through being missionaries? Absolutely. You know, it's hard being away from your family. You know, my older brother has, you know, 2 daughters. You know, it's hard to be away from my nieces. You know, they're 2 and 4. You miss a lot. There definitely are sacrifices, but the sacrifices never outweigh the blessing that God pours into your life.
That's good.
Especially like when you just say yes to him, like you give up a lot. I don't own a car. I don't own a house. We live in a small apartment in the middle of the city, and it's awesome. I don't make as much money as I did when I was an electrician, and I don't care. Why? Because I'm in the middle of what God's called me to. He provides everything that we need. What more could I want? How much money do you need to be happy? You need enough to live. And what else you need is a purpose. And that only comes from saying yes to the Lord. And so I think the one thing I would leave people with is just like your sacrifice for God is never going to outweigh the blessing that he pours out on your life when you say yes. And so I would just encourage people, man, like there's nothing in life worth more than just saying yes to God. There's nothing in life that's going to give more purpose than saying yes to God.
Man, that is so good. Both of you just sharing some great nuggets there as we wrapped up, and I so appreciate it. So thank you guys so much for your time. I hope, and I do believe that your story is going to inspire many, many folks. So thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thanks
thank you
for having us.